It's race week. We're back in Austin, and everybody seems to have a prediction about what's going to happen over the next six races. But how can any of them be right? We need some science. Here we go. So, for the first time in a couple of years, going into the last six races, we still have some open questions. The big ones are who's going to win the World Drivers' Championship. The lesser one is who's going to win the World Constructors' Championship, because it looks like McLaren have probably got that wrapped up if current form is to be projected forward. But the drivers, is it going to be Lando? Is it going to be Max? Is it going to be somebody else? Now, I think the only way to really understand this is to try and break the question down into three main areas for each team. Technical, this has to be the most important because no one's going to win a championship without the right car. We're talking about the steed that is going to be taking our gallant Formula One drivers into battle. And without that, there is no championship. The second is the drivers themselves, the flesh and blood within the cockpit, the beating heart of the car. Who's got the guts? Who's got the glory? Who's gonna be able to come out on top? And then the final is the team, the operations. And in that, I include reliability because reliability might be the deciding factor at the end of all of this. It's been pretty bulletproof for most of the teams over the last 3 years, but could there be a final fly in the ointment? Or could there be a DNF for another reason? That's what we're going to talk about. So let's talk about that first bit first, technical. So we're going into the US Grand Prix at Austin, and all of the big teams are coming with what we think are going to be fairly major upgrades. But I want to talk about this in terms of McLaren and then everybody else, because those two sets of teams have approached upgrades this year very, very differently. McLaren. So McLaren haven't had a major floor upgrade, according to them, since Miami. They've had a few little tweaks here and there, but they're coming to Kota with a big fat upgrade, we think. That's what Andrea Stella seems to be telling us. So why have they done that? Well, been a there's been a paradox here. This rule set. In the past, it used to be just whack on a load of downforce and just make sure that you don't have too much drag and you'll get performance, right? That's what they were doing right up until 2021. But from 2022 onwards, with these new ground effect cars, it's not quite as simple as that because the more downforce you put on and the lower you get the car, in the simulator and in the wind tunnel, that's a big thumbs up. Great, you're getting loads of performance, but that doesn't always translate to what you see on the track because the more you whack on, the closer the car gets to the ground, the easier it is to stall, and then you get that dreaded porpoising. And you don't quite get the balance that you think you were going to get when you saw the car in the simulator because the sim and the wind tunnel can't replicate exactly what you see on the track. What McLaren have done is that they've reached a sweet spot with their car, with the flaw that they introduced in Miami. And what they're seeing is that race on race on race, they're getting consistent performance and good performance across a wide range of tracks. So why change it? And the proof of that is when you look at all of the other teams, Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes have all brought big floor upgrades to their car, seeing big gains in downforce in the wind tunnel. And every single one of them has had to either step that back or modify their car. Ferrari brought a big upgrade in Spain and they went backwards for two or three races. Just look what happened to them in Canada. They've then had to go away and understand what they needed to do, focus a bit more on what the drivers were feeling, and they're back again with a platform that seems to be working, although not quite to the same level that McLaren have. Red Bull again brought their big upgrade. They've had to take it off again and go back to an earlier spec and back to back it between their two drivers because what they're seeing in the wind tunnel and the sim isn't correlating to what they're seeing on the track. Can you think of a time, especially under Adrian Newey, where Red Bull had correlation issues? No, that didn't happen. And it's because they've, again, big downforce in the wind tunnel, big downforce on the sim doesn't translate to performance on the track. And Mercedes have been very similar. They introduced a big floor upgrade for Spa. They then had to take it off in Spa after practice. They then won that race, but then they haven't really gone any further forward. And there's a balance here between introducing upgrades and standing still, which is what McLaren have essentially been doing, and allowing other teams to bring in their upgrades that haven't always worked. So they've still been ahead. So are they doing the right thing? Well, I had a little debate with somebody on Twitter, which usually results in a bit of name calling, but this time it was actually quite intelligent. Is it that McLaren, without having brought any upgrades, don't really understand the upgrades that they are going to bring to Austin, whereas Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes have had these setbacks in real time on track in the real world, and therefore their upgrades that they are bringing to Austin are informed by the setbacks that they've had already. So will they come with with an upgrade that is actually going to do the trick? The only the only quotes I have for this are what the team at McLaren said. So this is Rob Marshall. He says, look, it's nice to be delivering lots of little upgrades all the time, but equally, sometimes you just have to hold on a little bit while you wait for a chunk of bits to come at all the same time. Why is that important? Because if you do it bit by bit, you might introduce an upgrade on one part and then work on another part and find out actually it's a bit compromised by the previous change you made. So actually, if you've brought all the bits together in CFD and in the wind tunnel, it makes sense to bring them all together in one big package. That's Rob Marshall's argument. That is what McLaren are doing. Have they got it right? We don't know. What happens at the end of Austin, the end of the sprint and the end of race day might dictate what happens for the rest of the season. McLaren may have been caught napping, but it may be that the others have been caught short and we're just not going to know. And it's that that I think is of the most important part of the equation that dictates who's going to win the drivers' championship this season. Next part of it, driver. So the obvious candidates here are Max and Lando, and I've talked extensively about what I think of these two in terms of their championship chances. I think Max has probably been the better of the two. He has got wins out of a Red Bull that potentially didn't deserve to win. You think of Miami, you think of Canada. Those were wins that he probably shouldn't have won. Um, Even getting results out of the car that shouldn't have been there, beating Lando Norris when he shouldn't have done. Great Britain, Silverstone, absolutely perfect example. So he has maximized the car when he can, but he's also had the odd off race. Austria, you could argue, he could have battled more intelligently, perhaps brought home a result that wasn't the win, but perhaps was better for his championship chances in the longer run. Hungary was another example where frustration got the better of him. But despite that, he still got a 52-point lead, which is only 1 point less than what it was in Miami when McLaren came on song. And that really speaks to Lando and his performance, because although Lando has had the car to do it, and McLaren have too, have they really maximized the results? Were there wins that went begging? Should he have won in Canada? Arguably, yes. Should he have won in Silverstone? Arguably, yes. Should he have won in Hungary? Again, if he'd done the business off the line, arguably, yes. So there are a bunch of wins. You know, the fact that Lando Norris, with the car that he's had since Miami, has only got 2 wins, and one of them a slightly fluky win, doesn't speak volumes for him as a driver, unfortunately. And maybe there's a bit of the team involved in that as well. But he's been kept pretty honest by his teammate, Oscar Piastri, who on 2 occasions has won pretty convincingly on merit. So, yeah, I think there's still some question marks over Lando, but I think McLaren have decided to put their weight behind him now, and that'll be who they gun for. And if that's the case, then maybe they can overcome a few of the shoddy wins that they should have won earlier. Maybe those will come to him now. Who knows? But there's one more driver who I think is in the mix, who I think has been forgotten a little bit, and that's probably been the story of his season, and that is Charles Leclerc. I think there's an argument that Charles Leclerc has been the most consistent driver this season. Ever since race day in Japan, he's always been there or thereabouts. Every time the car needs to be maximized, he's maximized it. When that's meant there's a win on the table, he's got the win. He's got the better pretty much of his pretty highly rated teammate who was doing really well at the beginning of the season. Why are Ferrari getting rid of Carlos Sainz? Why is it Charles Leclerc that wasn't on the chopping block? Well, this is why. Because all of those naysayers that say he's a little bit like Sean Lacey, I think need to eat a little bit of humble pie this season. The mistakes have been cut out. I can think of one really bad weekend. That was Austria, where he dumped it in the gravel in Q3. But other than that, he's got podiums when he shouldn't have got podiums. Just look at Zandvoort. Look at his performance in Singapore when he really, really was hassling the second McLaren when he had no right to, really. With a better car, with a more consistent car over the course of the season, could he have been challenging? Yes. Does if Ferrari provide him with a car for the next 6 races and keeps performing the way that he has been performing, maximizing every result, out qualifying the car where it needs to, and then being intelligent with the tires in races, being intelligent with the team, which is something that he has done more and more this season in races. Could he bring himself into contention? If the others start to trip up, yeah, I think Charles Leclerc's on it. I think he's one to watch. Okay, the final little part of this, I'll talk about this quickly, operatively, and that includes strategy and retirements. McLaren, Red Bull, Ferrari, where do they stand? Well, McLaren have the car, but do they have the gumption when it comes to pit stops and strategy? Well, they've been caught short a couple of times. Silverstone, I think, was the big one, but you could argue Canada was as well. But they've been a bit better of late. They've had a bit more of a car advantage, but when they've needed to, they've pulled out the stops and they've won races. But even since the summer break, Monza, when they should have won that race, when they should have called team orders and held Oscar back, they didn't do it. And that's left them in a precarious position when it comes to strategy. Red Bull, similarly, as their performance has dropped off, suddenly their pit stops aren't the quickest anymore. And they are prone to the odd strategy error as well. And if either of these teams have a retirement, well, for Lando, forget it. That's it. Championship over. There's no way back from that. And for Max, just remember what happened to Fernando Alonso in 2012. He got taken out once in Spa and then had a retirement of his own making in Japan. And that was it. Curtains. Lost the championship by 3 points. Is there a scenario where that could happen to Max? Definitely. 52 points is a big fat lead, but with the car that McLaren have, if he has a retirement, I think it's all over. And that brings it to Ferrari. Ferrari again have had their strategy errors. They've been a bit silly, haven't they? But actually, in the last few races, Monza especially, even in Singapore, actually, they've started to really hone it in race trim. They've got quick pit stops. They make smart decisions. And when the car's on it, Charles brings home the bacon. The right driver in the right car is winning races for them. Who knows? So that's it. Where does that leave us? So if I had to put my money on it, I still think Max is going to win the championship. And I still think probably Lando will come second. But if anything happens, Charles is nipping at their heels. And for me, he's the thinking man's 2024 world champion. Let's see. It's a bold call, I reckon. And I'm going to hear from you guys in the comments. And I want to So as usual, please like, please subscribe, please leave me a comment. We'll read every single one of them and we'll reply to as many as we possibly can. And we will see you guys for a proper argument later this week. See you later.